3 ships sunk in 48 hours. That's all you need to know to start. The official position was this. A minesweeper was an auxiliary vessel, a small ship that did dull, technically necessary work so that larger ships could enter a zone safely. That's how the Navy described this work in its recruiting materials. Supporting role. Auxiliary function, not the front line. January 6, 1945, Lingayen Gulf, the Philippines. An invasion fleet of 875 ships approaches the shores of Luzon. Among all those ships, the minesweepers entered the Gulf first, ahead of the battleships, ahead of the cruisers, ahead of the landing craft, ahead of everyone else. And here is what happened to the ships that went in first. USS Hovey, sunk that same day. USS Long, sunk by a kamikaze the next day. USS Palmer, sunk 24 hours after Long. 3 months later, off Okinawa, USS Emmons, a minesweeper with a crew of 208 men, fighting off a kamikaze attack. The crew shoots down 7 aircraft. Then the ammunition runs out. Over the next 2 minutes, 5 kamikazes strike the ship in succession. 60 men are killed. The ship goes down, scuttled by her own fleet, to keep her from falling into enemy hands. This is not an auxiliary role. This is what happens to people who are sent in first and then described in official reports as a supporting element. Today we talk about minesweepers, about the men inside, and about one lawyer from Massachusetts who had never been to sea in his life, and about what he wrote about his life 20 years later. Because what he wrote explains something important about what this war really looked like from the inside. Picture this. You are standing on the stern of a wooden ship, 136 feet long, somewhere in the Pacific at night. 150 feet behind you, underwater, a paravein wire is being towed. That is the weapon you are operating right now. It cuts the anchor cables of mines. And the mines float up, behind you, after you have already passed over them. That is the fundamental physics of minesweeping that the recruiting materials never explained. A minesweeper cleared a mine only after it had already passed over it. The distance between the ship's bow and the point where the mine surfaced was the distance between life and death, a measure of how precisely the gear was set, how accurately the depth was judged, how correctly the paraveins were calibrated for the specific type of minefield in these specific waters. If any part of that was wrong, the distance disappeared. The Admirable class minesweeper, the Navy's primary steel fleet sweeper, 184 feet 6 inches long, 33 feet across, 945 tons fully loaded, top speed 14.8 knots, roughly half the speed of a Japanese destroyer patrolling the same waters. Crew, 104 officers and men, 104 people on a ship 184 feet long means there is no space aboard where someone else is not beside you. Bunks in 3 tiers in the few compartments where the construction permitted it at all. 1 head for every 18 men. The wooden YMS, yard motor sweeper, was smaller still, 136 feet, 33 men. An all-wood hull from keel to superstructure. Deliberately, because a wooden hull generates no magnetic field that could detonate a magnetic mine. The steel Admirable had to go through degaussing, an electrical current run through a special cable around the entire hull to reduce its magnetic signature enough that a mine it was sweeping wouldn't detonate before the wire reached it. This worked imperfectly. A residual field always remained. The men on steel minesweepers knew this. The Admirable's armament, 1 3-inch gun, 1 twin 40mm Bofors, 6 20mm Oerlikons, plus depth charges, and a Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. Substantial armament for a 900-ton ship. Enough to fight a submarine and have a reasonable chance. Entirely inadequate against a Japanese destroyer or an air attack. The minesweeper's official role was not combat. The official role was to clear the path for the ships that would do the fighting. The gap between that official role and what minesweepers actually faced at Lingayen Gulf and Okinawa is the story the Navy preferred not to tell. The sweeping gear occupied the entire stern. 2 paraveins created a V-shaped spread underwater. For magnetic mines, a towed cable with an electrical charge that triggered detonation behind the ship. For acoustic mines, noise generators that mimicked engine sounds. Different mine types required different gear, different procedures, different precautions, and a single field could contain several types at once, meaning multiple systems running simultaneously. All of this on a ship 184 feet long in water nobody had checked before you. Sweeping speed was critical, and not only technically. Optimal speed for paravane work was 8 to 10 knots. Faster, and the paravanes lost depth. Slower, and the geometry was wrong. At 8 knots in waters where shore batteries spotted minesweepers at dawn and opened fire because they knew what a minesweeper ahead of the fleet meant, the ship physically could not accelerate without breaking off the sweep. And breaking off the sweep, as we'll see shortly, was something the official doctrine directly prohibited. One minesweeper veteran, describing service on an admirable class after the war, summed up the conditions in one sentence. It was pretty crowded. Everything was crowded. But we got along and we did what had to be done. That's an honest description. It doesn't exaggerate, and it doesn't soften. Crowded, and they managed. That was the reality of a small warship in the Western Pacific, the official daily ration for a U.S. Navy sailor, 3,200 calories. In practice, what actually came aboard a minesweeper during operations was determined by what was available at whatever forward supply port the ship had last visited, and how long the ship had been able to stay at anchor long enough to load. Fresh food on a small minesweeper did not survive the tropical climate more than a few days. After that, canned goods, dry rations, rice from stores, 3,200 calories in theory. In practice, whatever was found. Water. On a steel admiral, evaporators produced fresh water for the boilers and for drinking. For washing, seawater with special soap that worked with limited effectiveness and left a salt residue on skin that was felt constantly. On a wooden YMS, the options were still more limited. Skin infections in the tropics, with constant exposure to seawater, not an occasional problem, but a professional baseline. Navy medical reports logged this as a chronic issue on small ships. The men adapted. There was no alternative. The watch system, officially 4 hours on, 8 hours off. In practice, 8 hours off existed as a concept rather than a reality during combat operations. A minesweeper clearing the path for a landing was at combat readiness from the moment it entered the operational zone to the moment it left. At Lingayen Gulf, that meant working from the 3rd to the 12th of January under continuous kamikaze attack. 8 hours between watches, on a ship that could be hit by a suicide aircraft at any moment, in a bunk below the waterline. That is not rest in the ordinary sense. It is a pause between watches. The engine room. 2 Cooper Bessemer diesels running at full power in a steel admiral in tropical waters raised the compartment temperature to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, around 52 Celsius. A machinist standing a 4-hour watch in that space was working in conditions that would have required the immediate shutdown of any civilian industrial operation, but it was just a watch. The next machinist would relieve in 4 hours. Then it would be your turn again. A minesweeper was not a quiet ship. The degaussing cable under current produced a constant electrical hum that was felt through the hull. The paravanes in the water created a vibration that men felt through the deck beneath their boots. The acoustic noise generators, loud and rhythmic, tuned precisely to the frequencies that detonated explosive charges. After enough time, sailors stopped noticing it. The nervous system absorbed it as background. But the background never stopped. And none of this, not the engine room watches in the heat, not the canned rations, not the stacked bunks. None of it was what the men on minesweepers were actually afraid of. What they were afraid of was something else. And it made no sound at all until the last possible moment. What they were most afraid of was the mine they had already passed over, the one the paravane didn't catch, the one lying 3 feet deeper than they had set the gear, or the type they had no equipment for in this particular field. The Navy had intelligence on the types of mines the enemy used in specific areas. The intelligence was incomplete. The enemy laid new fields. A minesweeper going into unknown waters did so with gear designed for the threat intelligence described as likely, not for the threat intelligence had missed. That gap between likely and missed is what cost USS Osprey her life on June 5, 1944, sweeping the path to the beaches of Normandy. Osprey struck a mine, sank within an hour, 6 men killed. The first casualty of Operation Overlord? Here is a direct quote from the official document governing the naval component of the Normandy landings. Operation Neptune. Operation. The section dealing with sweeping forces read as follows. The doctrine is to press home the attack with relentless vigor in spite of all opposition. Under no circumstances was minesweeping to halt, or landing cease due to enemy air attacks, bombardment, or losses. Not damage, not the threat of destruction. Losses. That means, if the minesweeper next to you just went down, you keep sweeping. If your ship has taken a hit, you keep sweeping. If your men are dead, as long as you have someone left capable of holding the wheel, you keep sweeping. Official naval doctrine formulated what it expected from the people on these ships with a mathematical clarity that the recruiting brochures never achieved. The question of air cover, or the absence of it, reveals the institutional logic that governed the fate of minesweepers in every major operation. Minesweepers entered operational zones before those zones had air cover. That was the point. They were clearing the path for the fleet that would bring the air cover with it. Minesweepers first, everything else after. In the interval between the start of sweeping operations and the arrival of the main force, an interval that could be hours or a full day, the minesweepers were in the operational zone without the anti-aircraft protection the larger ships carried, with armament inadequate to repel air attack in waters where the enemy already understood exactly what a minesweeper out front meant. By 1945, the Japanese knew precisely what it meant when minesweepers appeared ahead of an invasion fleet. They had watched it at Normandy, at Leyte, at Lingayen Gulf. A minesweeper out front was a signal. A large fleet is coming behind. And at Okinawa, they used that knowledge deliberately. Minesweepers in forward positions became priority targets for kamikaze attack, not only to block the fleet, because the minesweepers were small, slow, lightly defended, and they were first. The operational reports from Okinawa document this pattern with a specificity that is difficult to read. Ships with crews of 100 to 200 men receiving the same strikes as destroyers and cruisers, with a fraction of the capacity to absorb them. Lingayen Gulf, January 3, 1945. The minesweepers go in first. Kamikazes attack immediately. The airfields are dangerously close. Between the 3rd and the 12th of January, 24 ships sunk and 67 damaged. Among the first sunk, 3 minesweepers, which had entered first because doctrine required them to. The Navy documented every bit of this. And in the next operation, Iwo Jima, then Okinawa, it sent the minesweepers in first again. Because there was no other way, the doctrine was correct. Following the doctrine killed people. Both facts were known simultaneously, and neither canceled the other. This is where it's worth saying something the official war narratives almost never say. The Navy built public stories around its people. Submariners, carrier aviators, Marines, each got their narrative, their films, their recruiting posters. Minesweepers got none, and that was not an accident. It was because the narrative didn't work. How do you explain to an 18-year-old that his job is to go first into waters nobody has checked, slowly, in a ship that has no chance against any serious opponent, and that when he does his job well, the big fleet passes through behind him and the journalists write about the big fleet? The Navy solved this problem simply, by not creating the narrative at all. There is one minesweeper in this war, whose story is perhaps the most accurate mirror of how the Navy thought about these ships and the men on them. I mentioned it earlier. What was done to it after the war says more than any official report. We'll get there. April the 6th, 1945, 1532. Waters northeast of Yaeshima, Okinawa. USS Emmons and her partner USS Rodman are finishing a sweep. This is the first day of Operation Kikusui, floating chrysanthemum, the first of 10 mass kamikaze attacks off Okinawa. The Japanese have put approximately 400 aircraft into the air. The kamikazes hit Rodman first. 3 direct strikes. Emmons comes around and begins circling the damaged ship, guns firing continuously. The 40mm director on the starboard side reports a minimum of 10 aircraft approaching simultaneously from every direction. Every gun on Emmons is firing. The crew shoots down 7 kamikazes. Confirmed. At 17:32, the main battery ammunition is nearly gone. In the next 2 minutes, 5 direct hits. First kamikaze, into the bridge. The command structure destroyed or knocked out of action. Second, in the area of gun mount 2. Fire engulfs the mount and the upper magazine. The gun crew, no survivors. Third, at the stack. Fire spreads through the center of the ship. Fourth, into the stern. Steering destroyed. 5th, into the bow, near gun 1, the last gun that was still firing. 2 minutes, then the damage assessment. Steering, dead. Electrical power, dead. Fire pumps, dead. The ship is burning and drifting toward the Japanese-held shore of Okinawa. The crew fights the fires by hand. No water, the pumps are gone. Men in burning compartments find their way out in darkness. Those who can move drag those who cannot toward the rails. The water around the ship is warm from burning fuel. At 2100 comes the order, sink Emmons. She cannot be allowed to fall into enemy hands. USS Ellison opens fire on her own ship. 96 rounds from her 5-inch guns. At 0307 on the morning of April 7th, Emmons capsizes and goes down. The survivors of Emmons watch it from the decks of rescue vessels. The body of one of the Japanese pilots, still strapped in the cockpit seat, was found wedged in the after companionway. The ship's historians recorded it this way. Pilots from 2 enemy nations in 2 oceans found their end aboard, because a year earlier, off the beaches of Normandy, the crew of Emmons had pulled a wounded German pilot from the water. He died on the wardroom table. 1 ship, 2 oceans, 2 enemy pilots, and 60 of her own. 60 killed out of 208, 77 wounded. The ship received a Navy unit commendation posthumously, the award given to ships that no longer exist. Now for the part of this story that the official Pacific War narrative almost never tells. On March 27, 1945, B-29s of the 313th Bombardment Wing began laying minefields in Japanese home waters, primarily in the Shimonoseki Strait, through which roughly 80% of Japan's merchant shipping passed. The operation was called Starvation. Traffic through the strait fell from 70,000 tons per day in March to 1,750 tons in June, effectively zero. The final count for Operation Starvation: 12,135 mines laid, 670 Japanese ships sunk or damaged, totaling over 1,250,000 tons. In 5 months, more than all American submarines sank during the same period. Captain Kyuzo Tamura, a Japanese naval mine warfare expert, told Allied investigators after the war the result of B-29 mining was so effective against shipping that it was literally starving the country. The submariners got all the credit. The mines got almost none. Fleet minesweepers did the opposite. They cleared the path for their own fleet. And the scale of that function is measured by what the operations they opened were. On D-Day alone, 255 minesweepers cleared 10 channels through the minefields of the English Channel, working from 2 in the morning of June 5th until dawn on June 6th. Every one of the 5,200 ships in the invasion fleet passed through those channels. Without the minesweepers, the landing does not happen. Not figuratively, literally. The Navy built 481 minesweepers during the war. For comparison, carriers, 28, submarines, 248. The Navy built twice as many minesweepers as submarines, and nobody knew their names, because the Navy built no narrative around them. A narrative requires a story you can tell an 18-year-old, and this one couldn't be told in a way that would make him want to sign up. Maurice Edward Fitzgerald was born in Milford, Massachusetts in 1913, third son of Irish immigrants, a serious student who graduated from Boston College fourth in a class of 350, while taking a full year off mid-degree to work in a foundry and earn money for the next semester. Finished first in his law school class, paid his way through law school on night shifts at a rubber boot factory, $16 a week. After school, practiced law in Milford, had never been to sea in his life. After Pearl Harbor, Fitzgerald tried to enlist in the Marine Corps. Failed the physical, colorblind. He didn't give up. Through a contact, he obtained sample color vision test charts the Navy used and memorized the patterns. Passed the Navy physical on memorized answers. Volunteered. He was 28 years old. His wife was pregnant. He had no maritime experience of any kind. The Navy sent him through an 8-week officer training program at Princeton and gave him command of a newly built wooden minesweeper, USSYMS 339. 136 feet, 33 men, all wood hull. The story of how Fitzgerald reported to his first ship survived in family memory, and he laughed about it himself for years. Ordered to report to the minesweeper, USS Hawk, he walked down a long pier, found the right number, climbed aboard, and reported for duty. The watch officers were still laughing as he walked back down the pier. He had reported to a destroyer, a ship several times the size of his assignment, looking nothing like it. Hawk was further along the pier. He found her. YMS 339 participated in 9 amphibious landings in the Pacific. 9 times Fitzgerald took his wooden ship into waters nobody had checked before him, under fire from shore batteries that spotted minesweepers at dawn and opened up because they knew what a minesweeper out front meant. Kamikazes attacked his ship. A friendly aircraft attacked it by mistake. At Balikpapan, Borneo, 18 days of continuous sweeping under direct shore battery fire. On a single afternoon, 2 minesweepers alongside him struck mines and sank. That 18-day operation became the longest minesweeping campaign of the entire war. The crews of YMS 339 and several other ships received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism in action. Now for the minesweeper I mentioned earlier. USS Spectacle, Admirable Class, Pacific Fleet. Iwo Jima. Okinawa, strafed by Japanese aircraft. Hit by a kamikaze, direct strike, survived both. When Spectacle returned to the United States, the Navy examined the battle damage and made its determination. Repair not cost-effective. USS Spectacle was sold for scrap. A ship that had survived everything the enemy could throw at it was destroyed by its own fleet, because the cost of restoring it exceeded what the ship was worth in peacetime. That is how the Navy valued minesweepers, by how much more it could still get from them. After the war, Fitzgerald went back to Milford, divorced, returned to law, ran for the Massachusetts state legislature, and won by 10 votes on the final recount, became a judge, served in the Navy again during Korea, as a military lawyer this time, lived a full life that most people would have called more than enough. In 1968, by then a vice president of an insurance company and a part-time judge, he wrote a letter to an acquaintance who had congratulated him on a promotion. The joke at the start of the letter was not preserved. What was preserved is what he wrote at the end. Seriously, in closing, strange as it seems, I am happier than I have ever been in my life. This was written by a man who had watched minesweepers alongside him strike mines and go down, who had taken a wooden ship into unchecked waters 9 times, who had survived a war that took 60 men off a single minesweeper in 2 minutes. Who was happy? Maybe that is the most honest thing that can be said about the men inside this machine. They came out of it and found a life on the other side. The minesweeper cleared the path for them the same way it cleared the path for the entire fleet. First into waters nobody had checked, without guarantees, without a narrative. If you stayed until now, like and subscribe. Victory Vault comes out every few weeks. The next one is about the system that won the war before anyone admitted it out loud.